The morning alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had for the past 3 years. Maria rolled over in her small apartment, her body already aching before the day even began. She could hear her mother coughing in the next room, a sound that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. The medical bills were piling up again, and the insurance company had denied another claim just last week. She dragged herself out of bed and looked in the mirror. At 28, she looked older than her years. Her hands were rough from constant work, and her back hurt from carrying heavy trays all day long. But her eyes still held something special. Though she had almost forgotten what it was, Maria had been working at Romano's Italian restaurant for 3 years now. It was one of those fancy places where rich people came to eat expensive pasta and drink wine that cost more than she made in a week. The restaurant was beautiful, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and white tablecloths that had to be perfect at all times. She usually worked the evening shift, but lately she had been picking up morning shifts too. Double shifts meant double pay, and double pay meant she could keep up with her mother's medications. The other servers thought she was crazy for working so much, but they didn't understand. They didn't have someone depending on them like she did. The customers at Romano's were a different breed altogether. They wore expensive clothes and spoke in hushed tones about business deals and vacation homes. Most of them looked right through her, as if she was just part of the furniture. They would snap their fingers when they needed something, never bothering to learn her name, even though she had served some of them dozens of times. There was Mr. Peterson, who came in every Tuesday and always complained about something. Mrs. Chun, who brought her book club every month and left terrible tips. The young couple who came for their anniversary each year and acted like they owned the place. Maria knew all their faces, their usual orders, their little quirks, but to them she was invisible. But there was something in Romano's that always caught her attention. In the corner of the main dining room sat a beautiful black grand piano. It was massive and shiny, with ivory keys that gleamed under the soft restaurant lighting. The manager had told her it was worth more than most people's cars. Every day she would walk past it countless times, carrying trays and taking orders, but it just sat there, silent and unused. Sometimes, late at night after the restaurant closed, Maria would find herself staring at it while she cleaned the dining room. She would imagine herself sitting at that bench, her fingers dancing across those perfect keys. But then reality would hit her, and she would remember who she was and where she belonged. What nobody at Romano's knew was that Maria had a secret. When she was little, her grandmother had an old upright piano in her living room. It was nothing fancy, just a beat-up instrument that was probably older than her grandmother herself. But to young Maria, it was magical. Every day after school, she would run to her grandmother's house and spend hours at that piano. Her grandmother had taught her the basics, showing her how to read music and find the right keys. But Maria had a natural talent that even surprised her grandmother. She could hear a song on the radio and figure out how to play it just by listening. She could make up her own melodies that made her grandmother cry happy tears. Those were the happiest days of her childhood. She would sit at that old piano and dream of playing in big concert halls, wearing beautiful dresses and making people feel something special with her music. Her grandmother would sit in her rocking chair and listen, sometimes humming along or clapping when Maria finished a particularly difficult piece, but life has a way of changing everything. When Maria was 16, her grandmother passed away. The piano was sold along with everything else to pay for the funeral. Her mother was struggling with her own health problems, and there was no money for piano lessons or music school. Maria had to get a job right after high school to help pay the bills. She tried to keep playing when she could. She would sneak into the music room at the local community center when nobody was around. Sometimes she would find a piano at a hotel lobby or a church and play for a few minutes before someone asked her to leave. But as the years went by, these moments became fewer and fewer. Working at Romano's was just supposed to be temporary. Maria had applied to several music schools and conservatories, but the tuition was impossible without financial aid, and her grades weren't quite good enough for the scholarship she needed. She told herself she would save money and try again. Next year, but next year never came. The daily routine at Romano's was always the same. She would arrive at 4 p.m. for the dinner shift, tie her apron around her waist, and check her section. Table 12 was always wobbly and needed extra attention. The corner booth by the window was popular with couples. The big round table in the center was reserved for business meetings and birthday parties. She would take orders, serve food, refill drinks, and clean tables. Over and over again. Her feet would hurt, her back would ache, and her face would hurt from smiling at customers who barely acknowledged her existence. But she needed this job, so she kept going. Her coworkers were nice enough, but they didn't really know her either. They would chat about their weekends, their boyfriends, their plans for the future. Maria would listen and nod, but she rarely shared anything personal. How could she tell them about her dreams of playing piano when she was just a server in their eyes? The worst part was watching other people live the life she wanted. Sometimes famous musicians would come to Romano's for dinner. She would serve them their expensive meals and listen to them talk about their upcoming concerts and recording sessions. They lived in a world that felt completely out of reach for someone like her. At home, things weren't much better. Her mother's condition was getting worse, and the medications were getting more expensive. Maria spent her days off taking her mother to doctor appointments and dealing with insurance companies. She had no time for herself, no time for music, no time for dreams. Some nights she would lie in bed and remember how it felt to play piano. She would move her fingers like she was playing an invisible keyboard, trying to keep the muscle memory alive. She would hum melodies that she used to play, hoping she wouldn't forget them completely. But most of the time, she tried not to think about it. It was too painful to remember what she had lost. It was easier to focus on the present, on the things she could control. Get up, go to work, come home, take care of her mother, go to sleep, repeat. 3 years of this routine had almost convinced her that this was all there was. That dreams were for other people, people who had money and opportunities and luck. People who didn't have to choose between their passion and their family's survival. The grand piano at Romano's became a symbol of everything she couldn't have. Beautiful, expensive, and completely out of her reach. She had accepted that she would never play it, never even touch it. It was there to look at, not to use. But sometimes, late at night when she was alone in the dining room, she would stop and stare at it. And for just a moment, she would remember the little girl who used to play at her grandmother's house. The girl who believed that music could change the world. That girl was still there, somewhere deep inside, waiting for her. Chance to come back to life. Saturday evening at Romano's was always the busiest time of the week. The restaurant was completely booked, and Maria could feel the energy buzzing through the air as she tied her apron and prepared for what she knew would be a long night tonight. Was extra special because the Rossetti family had reserved the entire back section for their daughter's wedding reception. The bride, Isabella, was a beautiful young woman with flowing dark hair and the biggest smile Maria had ever seen. She had been planning this reception for months, calling the restaurant weekly to make sure every detail was perfect. Her family had chosen Romano's because of its elegant atmosphere and, most importantly, because of the live piano music they had been promised. Maria watched as the wedding party arrived, their faces glowing with happiness. The bride's dress was stunning, probably worth more than Maria made in 6 months. The groom looked nervous but excited, constantly adjusting his tie and checking his watch. Family members were hugging and taking pictures, their laughter filling the usually quiet dining room. The regular customers were also starting to arrive. The restaurant was at full capacity, with every table occupied and a waiting list of people hoping to get in. Maria could see the stress building on her manager's face as he tried to coordinate everything. Mr. Davidson had been running Romano's for 15 years, and he prided himself on never letting his customers down. At exactly 6:30 p.m., Mr. Davidson got a phone call that would change everything. Maria was passing by his office when she heard him talking, and even through the closed door, she could tell something was wrong. His voice kept getting louder and more frustrated. Then she heard him say the words that made her heart skip a beat. "What do you mean you can't make it? The wedding reception starts in 30 minutes. The restaurant's regular pianist, an elderly man named Professor Williams, had called in sick. He had been playing at Romano's every Saturday for the past 8 years, and this was the first time he had ever missed a performance. But tonight, of all nights, he was stuck in bed with a terrible flu and couldn't even get out of bed, let alone play piano for 3 hours. Maria peeked through the office door and saw Mr. Davidson frantically flipping through his phone, calling every musician he knew. But it was Saturday evening, and most professionals were already booked for other events. She watched him make call after call, each one ending in disappointment. Meanwhile, the wedding reception was supposed to begin. Isabella's family had specifically requested certain songs for their celebration. The bride's first dance with her father was supposed to be to "The Way You Look Tonight," and the couple had practiced their wedding dance to "At Last." These weren't just any songs to them. They were the soundtrack to the most important day of their lives. Maria could see the panic spreading through the restaurant. The kitchen staff was whispering among themselves, wondering what would happen. The other servers were shooting worried glances at each other. Everyone knew how much this meant to the bride and her family. She watched as Mr. Davidson approached the bride's table. His face was red and he was sweating despite the air conditioning. Isabella's smile faded as he explained the situation. Maria's heart broke as she saw the disappointment wash over the bride's face. This was supposed to be her perfect day, and now one of the most important elements was missing: the bride's mother. Mrs. Rossetti was trying to stay calm, but Maria could see the frustration in her eyes. They had paid extra for live music, and it was one of the main reasons they had chosen Romano's over other venues. The father of the bride was pacing back and forth, making phone calls of his own, trying to find a last-minute replacement. Other customers in the restaurant were starting to notice the commotion. Some were looking annoyed that their romantic dinners were being interrupted. Others seemed sympathetic to the wedding party situation. But everyone was watching and waiting. To see what would happen, Maria continued serving her other tables, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. Every time she walked past the grand piano, she felt a strange pull. Her fingers would twitch involuntarily, as if they remembered something her mind was trying to forget. She had walked past that piano thousands of times over the past 3 years, but tonight it felt different. As the minutes ticked by, the situation got worse. The bride was trying not to cry, but Maria could see her fighting back tears. The groom was holding her hand, whispering reassurances, but everyone knew this wasn't how their special day was supposed to go. Their family members were getting upset too. The bride's grandmother had been looking forward to hearing her favorite songs. The bride's little niece had been practicing a dance she wanted to perform to the music. These weren't just background melodies. They were the heartbeat of the celebration. Maria found herself standing near the piano, pretending to clean a nearby table but really just staring at the keys. She could almost hear the music in her head. The songs she used to play at her grandmother's house. Her fingers started moving slightly as if she was playing an invisible piano. The memories came flooding back. She remembered sitting at her grandmother's old upright piano, playing "The Way You Look Tonight" over and over until she got every note perfect. She remembered learning jazz standards and classical pieces, spending hours practicing until her fingers bled. She remembered the feeling of losing herself in the music, of forgetting everything else in the world except the sound of the piano, but those memories also brought fear. What if she had forgotten how to play? What if her fingers didn't work the way they used to? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these people? She was just a server, not a performer. Nobody would take her seriously. The internal battle raged in her mind. Part of her wanted to run to Mr. Davidson and offer to help, but another part of her was terrified of being judged, of being laughed at, of failing when it mattered most. She had kept her musical background a secret for so long that revealing it now felt almost impossible. She looked at Isabella again, sitting at her table with tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. The bride was trying to smile for her wedding photos, but Maria could see the sadness behind her eyes. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and it was being ruined by something completely out of her control. That's when something shifted inside. Maria, she thought about her grandmother, who had always told her that music was a gift, meant to be shared. She thought about all the times she had played piano just to make her grandmother happy, just to bring a little joy into someone's life. Maybe this was bigger than her fear. Maybe this was about something more important than her own comfort. Maybe this was her chance to use her gift for something meaningful, something that really mattered. The clock on the wall showed 7:15 p.m. The reception was supposed to have started 45 minutes ago. Mr. Davidson was still on the phone, but Maria could tell from his expression that he wasn't having any luck. The bride's family was starting to talk about canceling the musical portion of their celebration entirely. Maria's hands were shaking as she made her decision. She had spent 3 years hiding who she really was, pretending that her dreams didn't matter, convincing herself that she was just a server and nothing more. But watching Isabella's heartbreak, seeing a family's special day being ruined, made her realize that sometimes you have to take a risk. She took a deep breath and started walking toward Mr. Davidson's office. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was either going to be the best decision she had ever made or the most embarrassing moment of her life. Either way, she couldn't just stand there and watch anymore. Maria's legs felt like jelly as she walked toward Mr. Davidson's office. Each step seemed to take forever, and her mind was racing with a million thoughts. What if he laughed at her? What if she had forgotten how to play? What if she made a fool of herself in front of everyone? She paused outside his door, listening to him make another desperate phone call. Through the glass, she could see him running his hands through his hair. A gesture she had learned meant he was completely stressed out. His usually perfect tie was crooked, and his shirt was wrinkled from the chaos of the evening. "Please, I'll pay double your usual rate," she heard him say into the phone. "The wedding party is already here, and the bride is—" "Yes, I understand you're already booked, but—" The call ended with the familiar sound of disappointment. Maria knocked softly on the door. Mr. Davidson looked up, his face showing the exhaustion of a man who had run out of options. "Maria, not now. I'm dealing with a crisis here." "I know." "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's actually why I'm here. I wanted to ask you something." He looked at her with confusion. In 3 years of working at Romano's, Maria had never asked him for anything except time off when her mother was sick. She was always reliable, always quiet, always in the background. This was completely out of character for her. "What is it?" he asked, glancing at his watch. Time was running out, and he still had no solution. Maria took a deep breath. The words felt strange coming out of her mouth, like she was speaking a foreign language. "I can play piano," she said simply. Mr. Davidson stared at her for a long moment, as if he hadn't heard her correctly. "You what?" "I can play piano," she repeated, this time with a little more confidence. "I'd been playing since I was a child. I know the songs the wedding party requested. I could help if you want." The manager's expression went through several changes. First confusion, then disbelief, then something that might have been hope. "Maria, are you serious?" "You've never mentioned this before." "I know," she said, looking down at her hands. I never thought it was relevant to my job here. But I saw how upset the bride is, and I thought maybe I could help." Mr. Davidson was quiet for a moment, weighing his options. He had known Maria for 3 years, and she had never lied to him or let him down. But this was a huge risk. If she couldn't actually play, or if she wasn't good enough, it would make the situation even worse. "What kind of experience do you have?" he asked, carefully. "I learned from my grandmother when I was young," Maria explained. "I've been playing for over 20 years. I know classical music, jazz standards, contemporary songs. I can read sheet music, but I can also play by ear." The manager looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. This quiet server, who had been working in his restaurant for 3 years, had been hiding a talent that could save the day. It seemed almost too good to be true. "Maria, I have to ask... Are you sure about this? There are a lot of people watching tonight. The bride's family, all our regular customers. If something goes wrong..." "I understand," she said, though her voice was shaking. I'm scared too, but I can't just stand here and watch anymore. Let me try. Mr. Davidson made his decision. He was out of options, and the alternative was telling the bride's family that their reception was ruined. Okay, he said finally. But we do this quietly at first. You sit down and play one song. If it works, we continue. If not, we stop immediately. Deal? Maria nodded, though her heart was beating so fast, she thought it might explode. This was really happening. After 3 years of walking past that piano, she was actually going to play it. They walked out of the office together, and Maria could feel everyone's eyes on them. The wedding party was still waiting, their faces showing a mixture of hope and disappointment. The other servers had gathered near the kitchen, whispering among themselves about what might happen next. As they approached the piano, Maria noticed how different the restaurant felt. The usual background chatter had died down, and people were watching with curious expressions. Some of the regular customers recognized her as their server and were clearly confused about what was happening. Isabella, the bride, looked up as they passed her table. Her eyes were red from trying not to cry, but she managed a small smile when she saw Maria. She had no idea what was about to happen, but she could sense that something was changing. The grand piano looked even more intimidating. Up close. Maria had cleaned around it countless times, but she had never actually touched it. The black surface was perfectly polished, reflecting the restaurant's elegant lighting. The keys were pristine white and black, arranged in perfect order, just as she remembered from her grandmother's old piano. Mr. Davidson cleared his throat and addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we sincerely apologize for the delay this evening. Our regular pianist was unable to make it due to illness, but we have found a replacement. Please join us in welcoming Maria. The announcement sent a wave of murmurs through the restaurant. The wedding party looked confused but hopeful. The regular customers were clearly surprised to see their server walking toward the piano bench. Some of them were whispering to each other, wondering if this was some kind of joke. Maria's hands were trembling as she sat down at the bench. She had to adjust the height slightly, just like she used to do at her grandmother's house. The familiarity of the motion brought back a flood of memories, and for a moment she felt like that little girl again, getting ready to play for her grandmother. She looked out at the crowd of faces staring back at her. There was Isabella, trying to smile through her disappointment. There was Mrs. Rossetti, the bride's mother, looking skeptical but hopeful. There were the regular customers, including Mr. Peterson, who had never bothered to learn her name despite 3 years of service. The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Maria could hear her own heartbeat, the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic outside. The weight of everyone's expectations pressed down on her shoulders. She placed her hands on the keys and immediately felt a shock of recognition. The ivory was smooth and cool under her fingertips, exactly like she remembered from all those years ago. Her muscle memory kicked in, and her hands naturally found their position. For a moment, she just sat there, feeling the keys beneath her fingers. 3 years of silence, of hiding, of pretending she was just a server and nothing more. All of that was about to change with the first note she played. She closed her eyes and thought about her grandmother, who had always believed in her talent. She thought about Isabella, whose special day was hanging in the balance. She thought about all the dreams she had buried over the years, all the music that had been trapped inside her for so long. Then with a deep breath, she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the air, soft and delicate like a whisper that gradually grew stronger. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, each note clear and precise, flowing into the next with perfect timing. The effect was immediate and magical. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, waiters froze in place. Even the kitchen staff peeked out to see what was happening. The music seemed to cast a spell over the entire restaurant, transforming it from a busy dining room into something resembling a concert hall. Maria's fingers moved across the keys with a confidence that surprised even her. Years of practice, years of dreaming, years of suppressed talent all came flooding back. She wasn't just playing the piano. She was speaking a language she had almost forgotten, telling a story that had been locked away for too long. The transformation was complete. The invisible server had become the center of attention, and everyone in Romano's was about to discover just how wrong they had been about the quiet woman who had been serving their food for 3 years. The first few notes of Chopin's nocturne seemed to hang in the air like magic dust. Maria's fingers moved across the keys with a grace that nobody in the restaurant had ever seen before. The melody was soft and gentle at first, like a lullaby, that slowly grew more confident with each passing moment. Isabella, the bride, gasped audibly. Her hands flew to her mouth as tears immediately began forming in her eyes. But these weren't tears of disappointment anymore. They were tears of pure amazement. She had never heard anything so beautiful in her entire life, and it was happening at her wedding reception. The transformation in the restaurant was immediate and complete. Mr. Peterson, who had been complaining about his food just minutes earlier, set down his fork and stared at Maria with his mouth hanging open. Mrs. Chun, who usually kept her nose buried in her book, slowly closed it and gave Maria her full attention. Even the crying baby at table 6 seemed to quiet down, as if the music had cast a spell over everyone present. Maria's eyes were still closed, but she could feel the energy in the room changing. The nervous tension that had filled the air just moments before was melting away, replaced by something warm and magical. Her grandmother had always told her that music could heal people's hearts, and now she was experiencing it firsthand. As the nocturne continued, Maria's confidence grew stronger. Her posture straightened, her shoulders relaxed, and her fingers found their rhythm. This was what she had been born to do. This was who she really was underneath the server's apron and the tired smile she wore every day. The wedding party was completely mesmerized. The bride's father, who had been pacing anxiously just minutes before, now stood perfectly still with tears streaming down his face. The groom reached over and took Isabella's hand, squeezing it gently as they both listened to the most beautiful music they had ever heard. But the real magic happened when Maria finished the classical piece and smoothly transitioned into "The Way You Look Tonight." The bride's requested song filled the restaurant with a warm, jazzy melody that made everyone's heart skip a beat. Maria's voice, though she wasn't singing, seemed to speak through the piano keys, telling a story of love and joy that perfectly captured the mood of the evening. People started reaching for their phones, but not to check messages or scroll through social media. They were recording. One by one, guests began pulling out their devices to capture this incredible moment. The bride's cousin started a video that would later be shared thousands of times. A food blogger at table 12 began recording what would become the most viral video she had ever posted. The kitchen staff, who had been stressed and worried about the evening's disaster, slowly began emerging from the kitchen. The head chef, Antonio, wiped his hands on his apron and stood in the doorway, completely stunned. He had worked at Romano's for 8 years and had never seen anything like this. "I can't believe it," whispered Rosa, one of the other servers. That's really Maria playing? Our Maria?" The other servers nodded in amazement. They had worked alongside Maria for years, sharing breaks and complaining about difficult customers, but none of them had ever imagined she could do something like this. She had always been so quiet, so reserved, so ordinary in their eyes. As Maria moved into the bride's special request, at last, the entire restaurant seemed to transform into something magical. The regular dining room lighting suddenly seemed softer and more romantic. The white tablecloths looked more elegant. Even the flowers on each table seemed to bloom brighter. Isabella couldn't contain herself anymore. She stood up from her chair and began to sway gently to the music. Her wedding dress flowed around her like liquid silk, and her face was radiant with joy. The groom joined her, and soon they were dancing right there beside their table, lost in the moment and the music. Other wedding guests began to join them. The bride's elderly grandmother, who had seemed tired and frail when she arrived, was now clapping her hands and smiling brighter than anyone had seen her smile in years. The little flower girl, who had been restless and cranky all evening, was now dancing in circles, her small dress spinning around her like a fairy tale. But it wasn't just the wedding party that was affected. The regular customers who had come to Romano's for a quiet dinner found themselves drawn into the magic. A couple celebrating their anniversary at table 8 stood up and began dancing slowly, remembering their own wedding day from 30 years ago. An elderly man dining alone had tears in his eyes as he remembered his late wife, who had loved this very song. Maria could feel all of this happening around her, even with her eyes closed. The music was connecting everyone in the restaurant, creating a shared experience that none of them would ever forget. She had spent 3 years serving these people, invisible and ignored, but now she was touching their hearts in a way she had never imagined possible. As she played, the memories of her grandmother came flooding back. She remembered the old woman's encouragement, her gentle guidance, her belief that Maria had something special to offer the world. "Music is a gift, child," her grandmother had always said. "It's meant to be shared, not hidden away." The power of social media began to work its magic. The videos being recorded at Romano's were already starting to spread. The bride's cousin posted her video with the caption, "You won't believe what happened at my cousin's wedding." Within minutes, it had dozens of shares and comments. The food blogger's video was already gaining traction with the hashtag hidden talent. Maria was unaware of any of this. She was completely lost in the music, playing song after song with increasing confidence and joy. She moved from jazz standards to contemporary love songs, from classical pieces to modern hits. Each song seemed to flow naturally into the next, creating a continuous soundtrack for the evening. The restaurant's atmosphere had completely changed. What had started as a crisis had become the most magical evening in Romano's history. People were laughing, crying, dancing, and hugging. Strangers were talking to each other, sharing in the collective amazement of what they were witnessing. Mr. Davidson stood in the corner, watching it all with a mixture of shock and pride. In 15 years of running the restaurant, he had never seen anything like this. His quiet server, the woman he had barely noticed for 3 years, was creating magic right before his eyes. The bride's parents approached him during a brief pause between songs. "Where did you find her?" Mrs. Rossetti asked, her eyes still wet. With tears, "She's absolutely incredible. She's been working here for 3 years, Mr. Davidson replied, still hardly believing it himself. "She serves food? I had no idea she could play like this." As the evening continued, word began to spread beyond the restaurant. People walking by on the street stopped to listen to the music drifting out through the windows. Some even came inside. Drawn by the beautiful melodies and the magical atmosphere, Maria played for over an hour, creating a soundtrack for the most perfect wedding reception Isabella could have ever imagined. But more than that, she was creating a moment that would change not just her own life, but the lives of everyone who was lucky enough to be in Romano's that Saturday night. The invisible server had become the star of the show, and nothing would ever be the same again. When Maria finally finished playing that magical Saturday night, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. People were standing, clapping, wiping away tears, and calling out compliments. Isabella, the bride, was the first to reach the piano. She threw her arms around Maria, still wearing her server's apron, and whispered, "Thank you for making my wedding perfect." But Maria had no idea that this was just the beginning. While she was playing, dozens of people had been recording videos and posting them online. The bride's cousin had shared her video on Instagram with the caption, "Server turns into angel. You have to see this." Within hours, that video had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. The food blogger at Table 12 had posted her video on TikTok with the hashtag hidden talent. By Sunday morning, it had over 50,000 views. People were sharing it with comments like, "This gave me chills, and I'm crying at work right now." The video was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. Maria woke up Sunday morning to her phone buzzing nonstop. She had 17 missed calls, 42 text messages, and hundreds of notifications from social media apps she barely used. Her first thought was that something had happened to her mother, but when she checked, all the messages were about her piano performance. Her neighbor from across the hall was texting, "Girl, you're famous. You're all over my Facebook feed." Her old high school friend had sent a message. "Is this really you?" My sister shared a video and I couldn't believe it. Even her mother's doctor had somehow seen the video and left a voicemail saying how impressed he was. The local news station called that afternoon. The reporter, a friendly woman named Jennifer, wanted to do a story about the mystery server who stunned a wedding reception. Maria was terrified to be on camera, but something inside her had changed that Saturday night. She felt braver somehow, more willing to step out of the shadows. The interview aired on Monday evening. The news segment was titled, "From Server to Star, Local Woman's Hidden Talent Goes Viral." They showed clips from the wedding reception, interviewed Isabella and her family, and talked to Mr. Davidson about how he had never known about Maria's musical abilities. "She was always so quiet," Mr. Davidson told the reporter. "She did her job perfectly, but she never talked about herself. Now, I feel like I've been working with a celebrity for 3 years and never knew it." The response to the news story was overwhelming. By Tuesday, Maria's story had been picked up by national news outlets. The video of her performance was being shared on morning talk shows and entertainment websites. People were calling her the piano server and the hidden talent that shocked everyone. But the real changes started happening in her personal life. On Wednesday, she received a phone call that would change everything. The caller introduced herself as Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the Dean of Admissions at the city's most prestigious music conservatory. "Maria, I saw your performance online," Dr. Martinez said. "I've been in music education for 25 years, and I rarely see raw talent like yours. I would like to offer you a full scholarship to our evening program. You could continue working during the day and study music at night." Maria was speechless. She had applied to this very school years ago and been rejected. Now they were offering her a free education, something she had never dared to dream about. The offers kept coming. A local wedding planner called and asked if Maria would be interested in playing at weekend receptions. A fancy hotel wanted her to perform in their lobby during Sunday brunch. A jazz club offered her a regular Saturday night spot. "I can't believe this is happening," Maria told her mother as they sat in their small kitchen looking at all the business cards and offers spread across the table. "A week ago, I was invisible. Now everyone wants to hire me." Her mother smiled and squeezed her hand. "Baby, you were never invisible. You were just waiting for the right moment to shine." The financial impact was immediate and life-changing. The wedding bookings alone would pay for her mother's medications for the next 6 months. The hotel gig would cover their rent. The jazz club performance would be pure profit, money they could save for emergencies. But beyond the money, something deeper had changed in Maria. She walked differently now, with her shoulders back and her head held high. She smiled more genuinely, not just the polite smile she had worn for customers. She had remembered who she really was underneath all those years of hiding. At Romano's, everything was different too. The regular customers who had ignored her for 3 years now greeted her by name. Mr. Peterson, who had never bothered to learn her name, now called her the famous pianist and always left generous tips. Mrs. Chun brought her book club friends specifically to meet the server who plays piano like an angel. The restaurant itself had become famous. People were making reservations, just hoping to meet Maria. Mr. Davidson had to hire extra staff to handle the increased business. He also gave Maria a raise and offered her a flexible schedule so she could pursue her music career. "You've brought more attention to Romano's in 1 week than we've had in 10 years, he told her. "I should have been paying you as entertainment, not just as a server." The music school classes started 3 weeks later. Walking into the conservatory for the first time, Maria felt like she was entering a dream. The hallways were lined with photos of famous musicians, and the sound of practice sessions drifted from every room. Her classmates were mostly younger than her, fresh out of high school with wealthy parents who could afford the tuition. But Maria didn't feel out of place. She had something they didn't have: real life experience and a story that had touched millions of people. Her first recital was packed with people who had seen her viral video. The audience included Isabella and her new husband, several Romano's customers, her co-workers, and even some strangers who had traveled from other cities just to hear her play Da as she sat at the piano in the conservatory's concert hall. Maria thought about her grandmother. She wished the old woman could see her now, playing in a real concert hall. Wearing a beautiful dress instead of a server's apron, she began with the same Chopin nocturne that had started it all that Saturday night at Romano's. But this time she wasn't nervous. This time she knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. The performance was flawless. The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Several people in the crowd were crying, remembering their own dreams they had given up on. After the show, a young server from a nearby restaurant approached her. "I saw your video," the girl said shyly. "I sing, but I've never told anyone. Seeing what happened to you, ... it makes me think maybe I should try." Maria smiled and gave the girl her phone number. "Call me any time," she said. Dreams are meant to be shared, not hidden. 6 months later, Maria was featured on the cover of a national music magazine. The headline read, "The server who reminded us that talent can be found anywhere." Inside, they told her complete story, from her grandmother's piano lessons to her years of invisible service to that magical Saturday night that changed everything. She still worked at Romano's, but now it was by choice, not necessity. She had become the restaurant's official pianist, playing 3 nights a week for crowds of people who came specifically to hear her. The rest of her time was spent studying, performing, and teaching piano lessons to other people who thought their dreams were impossible. Maria had learned that sometimes the most beautiful transformations happen when we finally have the courage to show the world who we really are. Her story became proof that it's never too late to follow your dreams, and that extraordinary talent can be found in the most ordinary places. The invisible server had become a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt unseen or unheard. She had shown the world that everyone has a gift waiting to be discovered, and sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage to change everything.